Good evening. Mr. Secretary, thank you for your friendship, for your overly generous introduction, and if I may, your incredible support during my time and tenure as chairman of the Business Executives for National Security. You were instrumental in helping us achieve many of our objectives. But more importantly, we thank you. Everybody in this room thanks you for what you're doing for our veterans as VA Secretary. I promise you that our veterans have no better friend, have nobody who will fight harder for them, and no one who is going to be more creative in improving and changing the system for the betterment for the half of the 1% that put their lives on the line for this country. David Shulkin, our Secretary of the VA, is completely dedicated to their coming out of service and making sure that they get the best medical care that they can get. So Mr. Secretary, thank you again. It's okay. I will gladly share this award with you, sir, any day of the week. Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, members of our military, good evening again. One of the most enriching aspects of my life is being a part of the Greek Orthodox Church of the Hamptons through our great friendship with Father Alex and Santi Carloutsos. Their family. One of my most memorable days in learning more about the Greek culture was actually flying with Jim Chanos to Washington, where he said, "Are you Greek, by the way?" It's one of our first times we met, and I said, "No, I'm not." And he said, "Oh, wait a minute, that's a problem before we get to meet with the vice president." He said, I've got to baptize you." He said, "Get me some water." And he threw some water on me, and he said, "You're Greek for all intents and purposes." So, Jim, thank you. I have taken that to heart. But on a very serious note, Father Alex and Santi have been spiritual leaders for Wendy and I for more than 35 years. They've been through us with us together. We've been through the best of times, the most challenging of times, and I'm just deeply grateful for our friendship. So again, Father Alex and Santi, thank you for everything. Equally important, my family's life has been enriched by the many people from the Greek community whom we count as close friends, many of whom are here tonight. So to all of you, thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, we come together to commemorate an extraordinary day in Greek and Jewish history. It is made all the more special for my family as Jewish Americans to receive this recognition on a day marked by Greek courage in the face, as we have heard over and over, but I will say it again, in the face of Nazi hatred and persecution. This is a day that surely must never be forgotten. We must always take the time to remember it. And as we all know, Ochi, meaning no in Greek, is a reference to when Metropolitan Chrysostomos and the mayor of Zakynthos were ordered to write in a list, as we have heard before, but I want to say again, a list of the names of all Jewish members of their community for the Nazis to exterminate. In their saying no, they stood up to persecution, bigotry, and hatred, and at great risk to their own lives. My co-honorees tonight have similarly risked their lives and safety to stand up for what is right. So I would like to offer my deepest congratulations and admiration to Ji Sung Ho and Ayan Hersey Ali for your very well-deserved recognitions. Congratulations. Now, I know we would all like to think that in this day and age that we would make the right choices and stand up to the face of hatred and bigotry. But we should not make that assumption. We must keep these challenges in the forefront of our minds. And given what recently transpired in Charlottesville, we must be ever more vigilant. And our response to hatred must be without equivocation. As a writer for The Atlantic said, the durability of anti-Semitic tropes and the ease with which they slide into all displays of bigotry is a chilling reminder that the hatreds of our time rhyme with history and are easily channeled through timeless and anti-Semitic canards. To further underscore the need for vigilance and to elaborate on my earlier comment, the image of people marching in Charlottesville, Virginia, chanting "Jews will not replace us," make it clear that evil deeds can happen, and right here in our own backyard and in the greatest democracy that the world has ever known. So how should we respond? What should we do? The solution, my friends, cannot be to turn a blind eye. As Winston Churchill said, the longer you can look back, the further you can look forward. These are savvy words, given that we can never assume that history will not repeat itself. Rather, I think we should respond as my co-honorees have, by leaning in and standing up for what is right. We must be ready to defend the defenseless, help the helpless, and speak out, as Metropolitan Chrysostomos did so many years ago. But it requires courage, and by definition, it implies risk. Risk that, I will say again, my co-honorees continue to take probably each and every day of their lives. We must all show the world that intolerance will not be tolerated on any level on any day from any hate group. And ladies and gentlemen, we must call it out when we see injustice, whether it is here or in other countries around the world. We'll speak up. And in turning towards the global landscape, we are immediately reminded of the challenges that are unfolding even as we gather here tonight. Where in many countries, the right to practice one's own religion or the freedom of choice or to live in peace simply does not exist and cannot be taken for granted. To highlight but a few of the often mentioned violators of human rights, Russia has encountered few consequences for its invasion of the Ukraine and annexation of Crimea. Venezuela, our nearby neighbor, is in turmoil, and a dictatorship is trying to strip its people of all their rights. And Syria continues to suffer from a brutal dictator. And the result is that we have seen nothing short of the equivalent of genocide in Aleppo. Iran deprives its people of the freedom of choice and is still the top exporter of terrorism around the world. And North Korea, which may be in a league of its own, deprives its people of absolutely everything, threatening the world regularly writ large. There are many others who deserve a place on this list. Sadly, the number of sovereign states and terrorist groups who oppress and subvert others for their own gain is far, far too long for me to mention tonight. But history shows that they will face the consequences of their actions. And yet, with all this being said, change is taking place as people gain the courage to come forward. On a positive note, we have seen people gaining power and influencing outcomes thanks to the digital age that we now inhabit. This empowerment driven by the millennial generation, yes, Ethan, I said the millennial generation in a positive way, several years ago resulted in the unthinkable occurring. The people of Tunisia and Egypt, after substantial persecution, utilized social media as a mechanism to effectively generate a call to action. And in spite of all the odds, they were able to effectuate the overthrow of the authorities that oppressed them. So we now know what can be accomplished when people stand up in the face of oppression and tyranny. While Tunisia and Egypt were among the first, it clearly portends a different future, where the people will weigh in with more impact and have the ability and capacity to potentially create lasting change. Ladies and gentlemen, at this time, more than any other moment since post-World War II, the United States has a moral imperative to provide both leadership and the protection of the less fortunate. When the United States uses its intellectual capital and might for good, there is no country, absolutely no country, with the equivalent resources to effectuate positive change. But we must act with urgency. In certain parts of the world, and with compassion, clarity, and diplomacy, to avoid more humanitarian disasters like Aleppo. I have had the privilege, as the Secretary said, of spending time involved in the national security apparatus, formerly serving on the Defense Business Board, as well as my time as chairman of the Business Executives for National Security. And along the way, I've had the privilege to work with the best and the brightest, many of whom are in this room. I have learned from them. And from this front row seat, my simple takeaway is that while the world continues to become more global, we are more than ever in need of strong leadership that understands how interconnected and reliant we are upon one another. Ladies and gentlemen, living in a global village and a global business environment requires tolerance. So let us seek to better understand and tolerate each other. And finally, we can never take for granted that living in the United States at the price of freedom is not for free. We must never forget that we owe an enormous debt of gratitude to the nearly 1% who serve in the military. I would remind us all that in an hour of need, when our country will ask the question, who will put themselves in harm's way, who will always be prepared to make the ultimate sacrifice in defense of our freedoms, who, whenever the nation finds itself in an hour of need, whenever our nation asks, who shall I send, who will go for us? For the men and women of the United States military, the answer has always been and will always be, here I am, send me, I will go. To such men and women we owe our very security and freedoms. So please join me in thanking them now. Thank you. Thank you. As I conclude my remarks this evening, I thank you for this most meaningful recognition. And I want to also thank my family, Wendy, David, Charlotte, and Lauren, as well as my Benz and C&W family. God bless you all, and God bless America.
Ladies and